Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hold on, let me try again. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
There you go. Right. It's 2:20 p.m., 2:21, and we're about ready to start. This panel discussion, as forecast 2024, continues. My name is George Davis. I'm the Deputy Executive Producer, Editor at Nationwide News Network, Nationwide 90 FM, and I'm a proud product of this institution. I'm very happy to be here. So what we have in front of us is, in terms of a format, it's straightforward. It's a panel discussion. The topic is heavy, and that's why we've brought out the heavy hitters. The panel is comprised of our host, Dr. Kevin Brown, the president of UTech Jamaica, Professor John Lindo, director, Mona Office for Innovation and Research at the UWI Mona, Professor R. Clive Landis, he's online, principal at the Cave campus of the UWI, Floyd Green, Member of Parliament for Southwest St. Elizabeth and the Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, and Professor Paloma Mohammed, who's also online. She's, we're talking about the Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana. Now, as we look at today's topic for the panel discussion, science and technology innovation imperatives for national and regional development, priorities for economic development. It's important that we pivot from the point of where Jamaica was, where innovation is concerned. Every time I hear a discussion about innovation, and I think back to the glory years, I get cross because I'm saying, well, the glory years are too far away, which is perhaps why we are in the predicament we are in now. For those who know their history, you would recall that the period of the 1930s and 40s represented significant innovation for Jamaica in agriculture. When a man that much has been said of, it's a pity that we haven't been able to produce one like him since, Dr. Thomas Leckie, T.P. Leckie, he created a breed of cattle that were very much suited to conditions that exist in Jamaica year-round. And you know about the Jamaica Hope and the Jamaica Black and all that. And the 30s and the 40s was when innovation led to the creation of those breeds of cattle which were used to living in conditions, or which were created to be adapted to live in conditions where there wasn't much water. They were, of course, very much resistant to ticks and other tropical, I don't want to say tropical maladies, but parasites that come with tropical conditions. So they were very much suited to these conditions. The Australians took a lot of those breeds of cattle there and other parts of the world which have climatic conditions similar to Jamaica. So that was a high point in our innovation. T.P. Leckie did so much good work. The Bordeaux Research Station, just between Old Harbour and, well, just between the border of St. Catherine and the border of Clarendon down there, that's where he pivoted from. And when you think about it, the 1930s and 40s as a benchmark in our innovation history. And we only have one more period, a golden period for innovation, more industrialization to be precise, but there was innovation alongside the industrialization. You had to come back, you had to vault forward to the 50s, 60s, and 70s somewhat, early 70s. Another man, Robert Lightburn, Bob Lightburn, out there in St. Thomas, a four-time member of Parliament, a Minister of Industry, a man who authored Jamaica's industrialization process, a man who innovated. Factories opened up under his watch like this. There's a famous story of him calling a young Wilmot Perkins at the Gleaner to complain about the Gleaner not covering the opening of a factory in St. Thomas. St. Thomas was once the economic leader of this country. And it is said that when Perkins was challenged about the Gleaner's absence, he said, Mr. Lightburn, it's difficult to have covered this because you open a factory in St. Thomas almost every day. So for us to drive from Kingston there, it's really arduous. That just shows you the scale at which things were happening. Industrialization was being driven and innovation was driving industrialization. So 50s, 60s, 70s to some extent, golden period for industrialization in Jamaica, driven, of course, by innovation. Back to the 30s, 40s, T.P. Leckie, look at the chasm between both periods and look at where we are now. the country is begging, crying out for innovation thought leaders to put policies in place that can facilitate the work of business people, that can facilitate investment, and for those in schools at every level, primary, secondary, and tertiary, to understand what a country's innovation and innovation policy is, where science and technology support that innovation policy, and even distinct policies for those two disciplines themselves, and how that can drive the economic development of the country. So that is the base from which we will pivot here insofar as the Jamaican experience is concerned. There are people on the panel who have experiences outside Jamaica who should be able to lean on that for the perspective that they'll be able to provide today. And so I want to take my panelists. First of all, let me check that everybody is hearing me. Well, Dr. Brown is here physically. Professor Lindo? Good afternoon, sir. Professor Landis?
Good afternoon.
Excellent. Minister Green?
Afternoon to the panelists.
Thank you very much. Professor Mohammed?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Excellent. So I'm hearing everybody loud and clear, and it appears that I am being heard too. All right. So the first thing in this panel discussion will involve a broad area concerning prioritizing the policy and governance framework, because that's where everything starts. It has to start with a vision articulated by a government and then a framework established to allow the kind of innovation, thought leadership to happen that can result in tangible things following. I want to ask the question of our Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, Mr. Green, and it concerns this question. Do we, you would say, have regulatory frameworks to support technological innovation in Jamaica? I'll pose the question Caribbean-wide after you answer the Jamaica leg of the question, Minister. Are there regulatory frameworks to support technological innovation in Jamaica?
So again, thank you, George, and let me just thank the organizers. I'm very happy that our universities, UTech, UWI, University of Ghana, University of Trinidad, have pulled together to focus on research, and that we're having a panel of this nature where at the center of it is agriculture and fisheries and clearly other areas that I get a chance to share on. The answer is yes, we do have frameworks that I think help to drive innovation, but there is still a lot more to be done. And I think there is a lot of scope, a lot of room for us to put in more, a stronger policy framework, especially through the Ministry of Science and Technology, to get this sort of innovation that you spoke of. Clearly, from the agriculture perspective, one of the things that we have been doing is trying to see how we can work more closely with our educational institutions to align their areas of study, their areas of research with the practical realities on the ground and the challenges that we face. Clear, we are now in a new paradigm. The climate has shifted. We are seeing a lot of differences. So part of what we've been trying to do is to create that space through policy at the ministry, through our various entities or agencies, to engage directly with researchers. And, one of the things that you spoke about, and one of the things that has happened, is that we have had to be, since time immemorial, our own sort of leader in relation to research and innovation through our various entities. So we did have a extremely well organized framework around research and development, led by BODLs, with various research stations that were put across various parts of Jamaica to focus on specific areas of research in agriculture. But unfortunately, not by virtue of policy per se, but definitely by virtue of funding, we allowed that to wane. And I'm sure we can speak more about to change that reality. So some of the innovations that you spoke of, at that time, BODLs was considered cutting edge. BODLs was seen as almost a mecca for tropical research. Again, over the years, with a lack of investment, that has changed. We're changing that now. So yes, there's a policy framework. Yes, it is a priority for the government, but priorities have to be backed by resources. And part of what we're doing in agriculture and fisheries and mining is to put more resources to our research priorities. And again, We can speak about that, some of the work that we've been doing at the Coconut Industry Board and our Boulders Redevelopment Program and our research rehabilitation program that we started a few years ago. And now we're spending about 10 billion Jamaican dollars to try and ensure that
Yes.
our researchers have the capacity to
Yeah.
drive research.
Yes. Professor Mohammed, I put the question to you and stretch it Caribbean wide. Someone outside will say, well, they look at the economies of the Caribbean, they narrow it down to CARICOM and say there is not a developed regulatory framework to elicit the gains that innovation would provide. How would you answer that question or deal with that point, address that point? You're muted, Dr. Mohammed, Professor Mohammed, sorry.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Don't think that I can speak for the whole CARICOM, but I can speak to what I know. And that is that there is a framework. It is dated. I think the date I saw in it was 2008 or 2000, or the revision in 2011. So it would be about 10 years dated. And one of the particular things I think Caribbean wide, I just came from a conference yesterday discussing this question of, what is the future of the Caribbean in a certain sense. I'm not a science and tech, but science and tech kept coming up all of the time. And one of the things that we looked at across the region was, and this is not CARICOM. CARICOM was in the room, but it was not a CARICOM conference. I just
Yes.
wanted to be sure that I'm clear. Is how what the research funding for the for the Caribbean has been. And so Minister spoke about that as well. That's one of the things. So the framework that exists, I think, in for CARICOM, as well as across the region, definitely would have to be revisited. So we needed to put some money in there to support that. We need to put some money in to support what all of these agencies in the golden years that were described by you in the beginning, and of course by Minister. And many countries have this, and they'll speak for themselves. But the funding for research and innovation and technology is the first to go anytime you have financial problems. So we need to fund that. We need a Caribbean wide National Science Foundation that funds a work that could be collaborative across the region. And we need to be able to put all our cards on the table and to see who's doing what best and to synergize, but also to farm out, so to speak, who could do what in the universities, in ministries, in other institutes, and so on across the region. Because I believe that what we were considering and thinking about 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, that paradigm might have shifted very significantly, both in terms of the technologies that are available to help us accelerate our work, but also the needs of the planet and definitely the needs of our region.
Yeah, thank you for that. Professor Landis, there are those who would say that the absence of intellectual leadership around the issue of innovation is the reason for governments across the region not having in place the framework that is needed at this time to respond to developments in the marketplace and in societies. How would you respond to that?
With a certain level of incredulity. So, when you speak of absence of intellectual leadership, I'm just thinking of one of the organizers of this conference, Professor Michael Taylor, and colleagues of ours, both across all the campuses, who shared in the Nobel Prize and were absolute thought leaders in everything to do with climate change. The idea that we don't have intellectual leadership, when you look at our Vice Chancellor, who is basically the most respected historian and advocate for reparations, I think is misplaced. Now, I do think that there are gaps. There are definite gaps in our innovation system. And the way I see it is that we do not lack for the ideation phase of innovation. So both our staff at our universities, and I'm including all universities in the Caribbean, and our students are incredibly innovative in their thinking. But you always need to have, after you have the idea, the ideation phase, you need to have a phase where you allow space, particularly for governments and for private companies, to come in and contribute funding to, bring the ideas to some sort of fruition. And the ultimate aim for all the partners, the three partners, would be the universities or higher education institutions, the government, and the private sector, would be to share in a product or an idea that is that is globally competitive, that capable of being exported. You just gave the example of the breed of cattle that were so innovative that they could be exported. In your case, to Australia. So that is the goal, and where it's worked well in places like the US. And I have to say, the US went through its low growth phase as well. Universities were not translating their ideas into outputs until the Bayh-Dole Act. The Bayh-Dole Act in 1980 was totally transformational. And it basically allowed a sharing of the intellectual property and, of course, a sharing of the gains, the money that you would actually make from an entrepreneurial idea in those three partners, which is the government, the higher education institution, and the private sector. And it's in that partnership which you see so clearly in all of these business parks which surround universities in the US, Triangle Park in North Carolina or University Park at MIT. It's just created that environment where the three partners can share in that innovation process and in the benefits that arrive from it. So we have plenty of ideas and intellectual leadership in our university, but we're lacking that good tripartite relationship between the higher education institution, the government. There are no budgets that I'm aware of in the Caribbean that allocate a percentage of the national budgets or regional budgets to research, which of course happens in the US, and the private sector, where you have that good functional tripartite relationship. That's what drives innovation that goes the whole way to something that's capable of being exported.
Thank you, Professor Landis. And in point of fact, the issue of the lack of intellectual leadership came out of a discussion I had on radio with business leaders, members of the micro, small, medium enterprises sector, and the PSOJ, talking about the lack of innovation in Jamaica over the years. And as I find is common, sometimes business people, when looking at what is lacking, they say, oh, the universities are not doing this, the universities are not doing that. So that's where that argument came from. I'm not hearing you, Professor Landis. Could you enable your microphone? Go again.
My microphone
yeah,
is
hearing
on.
you loud and clear now. Hearing you now. Go ahead.
Okay, so sorry to cross you there, but the business people have a point. But the point is that they're not engaging with the universe. They're not engaged in that fulsome relationship, so that they can tap into all of this creativity that exists within our institutions.
Yes, thank you. Professor John Lindo, the issue of the gaps, those emerged in the contributions made by Professor Mohammed and Professor Landis in their opening response. And I also want to ask you, how is it that institutions such as the one you represent, how is it that you can nudge governments in the direction of closing those gaps, and even those in the private sector doing business responsible really for economic growth?
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks to the organizers for involving us. I'm very pleased about this collaboration, the forecast collaboration. I just want to add to what Prof. Landis said and to something that you said about the engagement. It's comes from several different angles. One of the things that we have is that it's very, very hard to engage partners. We have a culture here of governments and private sector looking outside.
And when you say here, you're talking Jamaica or Caribbean-wise?
Caribbean-wise,
okay.
Looking outside for their solutions. And we take responsibility that we are not engaging the private sector enough and engaging government enough. We have tried. I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of scientists like to work in their silos. That's one thing. It's very hard for me sometimes to get two groups working in two labs beside each other to communicate. You want me to put my closer?
Yes,
I'm
that's
so
perfect.
sorry. So that's one issue. How do we build collaborative network within our own scientific community to start? And this conference is one example of how we can do that. Now, how do we move from there into engaging the private sector? We have to take some responsibility as universities to engage the private sector and the government. So how do you, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture, since my good friend is here, how do you solve a problem from the concept, from conceptualizing that problem to solving it, that you can engage your partners, that it becomes part of their policy, it becomes part of the bottom line in terms of the private sector. So we have a lot of work to do, legwork, and this legwork cannot be left to bread and butter laboratory scientists like myself, because we're not trained in that paradigm. So we need that mechanism to build those bridges to engage the private sector, to engage governments, and to engage within networks. We come back to funding, and I think there's something hidden in the science and technology policy of the government of Jamaica, committing some money to science and technology. I'm going to look it up, Minister, and come see you about it. But there is, which has not been activated. So we are in a small economy. We with very thin budgets. However, collaboratively, we can punch above our weight if we work together. So how do we, President sitting beside me, how do we look at these mechanisms that we're not duplicating stuff at UWI, here at UTech or UTT or at KVille? One of my colleagues said that I am much closer to my colleagues in the UK working together than I am with my colleagues across the street. So we need to build those collaborations, and we need to engage, and we have to take responsibility for the lack of engagement. And the last thing I'll say, sorry for taking so much time, is
That's
that
fine.
we are very quiet about what we do. So we are very quiet, and we don't engage the public. So science and technology remains a mystery. So when people think of the University of the West Indies, they think of the social scientist, for example, who is on talking about violence, but not the persons in the lab. And the final thing I have to say is that we have to have that infrastructure within our universities to drive the tech transfer, to get that innovation out of the lab into the market. And that requires specific investments, and as universities, we must make those investments. And I think there's a nice project that we have funded now that takes into consideration, I know that UWI, Mona, and UTech on tech transfer. So those are some of the opportunities. And as a final thing I say, again, I said it 4 times, as universities, we take responsibility for that lack of engagement.
Thank you for that. And I hear collaborations emerging already as a theme across all the speakers so far. So the host speaks last at his own gathering. And Dr. Brown, here's where I want to take you. And this question comes from my perspective from my reality as a journalist. Science and technology issues and matters concerning innovation are the most unsexy news topic you could ever put into a news bulletin. Yeah? If there's a press conference where the minister in charge of those areas and you pass it on and the editor then assigns it, everybody's at pains, groan, it's going to be boring, it's going to be uninspiring. That's the kind of thing. How can a country with the reception of material concerning those very important issues from the people who write the news, the people who consume the news, then convince the population that, we are developing a regulatory framework to facilitate innovation and investment in innovation and advancements in science and technology when the population is distinctly uninspired?
But I don't know if I agree with you, George, because most Jamaicans have this device. right? And this little device, a mobile phone, is actually a mini computer.
Yes.
And they do a lot of ingenious things on them.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of Jamaicans accept and are excited by technology. I think the real question, George, is how much are they allowed to participate in the development of this technology? So at the moment, most Jamaicans consume technology, and perhaps maybe that is the disassociation you're identifying.
Yeah, but let me take you up on that, because here's the thing, and Professor Linda said it. Not many people view that powerful device you just held in your hand in the way you articulated just now, even though it is, because there has been very little, if anything, from the perspective of our policymakers to say, listen, this is what that is. This is the power that you have when you have this. This is how much it has advanced over time to allow you to do all these great things. And that is part of the problem, because the articulation about what science and technology and innovation mean in everyday life is sadly lacking, because scientists are busy researching, and people who are involved in technology are busy creating, ideating, and conferring among themselves. And the broader population is not being carried along for the ride. And that's where I want to go. How do you carry people along for the ride in the way that you just articulated brilliantly in few words, the utility of a device that people depend on daily?
Well, I think it's absolutely crucial that we take the Jamaican population, and by extension CARICOM, along that journey in terms of the importance of technology. Because the future of the world is technological, right? That's for sure. And we're not going to put it back in a box. We speak about artificial intelligence. It's here to stay and will grow and become and evolve something else as we evolve. What we require, George, is that inspiration, as you say, so that we can have the educated population that becomes tomorrow's workforce that is able to indeed participate in the future of technology. That is a challenge, I think. So my question is this. Is Jamaica, is CARICOM an enabling environment for technology? Now, someone spoke earlier on the panel about us consuming technology. And so my message to Minister Green and the governments across the Caribbean is they have to decide, are the governments going to persist with the Caribbean being consumers of technology, with the Caribbean always looking outside for technological development? And I'm saying to them that we have the talent. We have the human resource. George, there are too many people in diaspora that I know who are excelling at science and technology and developing that technology for overseas countries.
Correct.
Jamaicans like
Yes.
me and you and others here. So we have the human capacity. And what we require, George, is for our governments to invest in us. It's as simple as that. Our governments must commit funding, continuous funding, for our countries, for our universities in education, education, education. Because here's the thing. When we talk about these so-called developed countries and their innovation, how do they get there? They get there through government funding. There's no rocket science to it. Their governments see the impression or perception of their countries as technological as a national imperative. The UK must be seen as a technological country. The US likewise, right? And so they put their money into the universities, right? There is no National Science Fund, last time I checked, Minister Green, set up by the government of Jamaica. My faculty, my talented faculty here at the University of Technology have no government of Jamaica funding to apply to do research. They have to go to USAID, they have to go to Canada Aid, they have to go to British Aid. Why is that? Why can't the government of Jamaica move away from rhetoric and say, you know what, we are going to turn this island into a technological island and we're going to budget for it. We're going to commit billions of Jamaican dollars every year to invest in our talent, keep them here and let them do fantastic and amazing things in our institutions. So George, what I'm saying to you is not complicated. If the government of Jamaica and the CARICOM see this as a national and regional imperative, they will find the funding. And if they commit to it, George, I'm telling you, our people are talented enough to deliver for our nation and turn this country not just into some tourist attraction.
Yes.
But into an island known for, one, a highly educated population, and two, a technological workforce. And guess what? When we become known for those things, the jobs and the companies will come. They will say, hey, I can take my company here because Jamaica has the workforce to do this. And so now you'll next time you'll hear, oh, Jamaicans are the ones who produce the apps for the iPhone. Jamaicans are the ones manufacturing the hardware for the iPhone, because we have given the world the confidence that we have the population to do it. But the government. And our last point, I'll say this. Many of us will say, because we've been conditioned to say, well, we must look to the private sector. Well, here's the reality, Minister Green. The private sector will invest in what we call sure shots. The blue skies, the early ideation, the private sector will be hesitant to put their money there. That's the space the government has to occupy. That space where the private sector is not quite sure if they want to put some money there, right? But you as a government will now give our researchers the opportunity to build something, and from there, things evolve. Because all these big ideas start with a small little scientist locked in a lab, and then it becomes something else. But the start is with government funding.
Wow, Minister, you're on a panel of outstanding academics. As the only cabinet minister here, you have to feel the pressure. Fret not, I'll protect you. But there were a lot of whys asked by Dr. Brown just now, and effectively he's saying you can't have a government, whether singularly like ours or collectively like those of the CARICOM member states, who talk about the need for innovation thought and innovation ideas to drive innovation policy and to elicit gains from innovation and science and technology, when you're not funding it. Is it such a hard sell to finance ministers, yours included?
So, I'll try to compress a lot that I have to say in a short space, George. But let me start that anything I say in relation to science and technology, please bear with me. I'm not the Minister of Science and Technology, so do not take that as a policy position on science and technology, especially in some of my responses to Dr. Brown. Anything I have to say on education, well, please. But the things I have to say on agriculture, you can take those on. All right? So, one, is it a hard sell? I think when you look at the amount of resources that is now being put into innovation, into science and technology, definitely on the agricultural side, it's a fact that for decades, maybe because a lot of the work is behind the scenes, maybe because, as you have said, George, it's not necessarily seen as sexy election winning work. Maybe that's why in the past, in decades gone by, governments underfunded research capacity, research work, entities like the Scientific Research Council. And clearly there's always space for more funding, and I'll make that point. But definitely I can say that over the last few years, we have seen a significant uptick in the funding around research, the funding around our research institutions. Again, I'll use Bodles as an example. No significant funding over the last 20, 25 years. We started first with our Bodles redevelopment program, where we put $1.2 billion over about 3-4 years. We have now expanded that, and we're putting $6 billion over the next 6 years to completely revamp not just Bodles, but all our research stations, revamp our technology labs, revamp our equipment to ensure that we have more modern equipment that are keeping up with the times. So resources are being pumped, definitely from an agricultural standpoint, into research in a very big way. Clearly, from a government perspective, we have put forward a new science, technology, and innovation policy. And I think it was Prof. Linda who spoke about that in that policy, which was put forward in 2022, a new version of that policy, and by Minister Vaz. It does speak to direct funding in relation to innovation, in relation to science. And I think that is happening. That is, again, budgets take a little time to catch up with policy, but that is the direction of the government. The Prime Minister has already said that we believe that we should be creators of technology, not just consumers of technology. And a lot of the innovation, a lot of the projects being run, the competition being run among schools around science and technology. You see the DBJ having a big hand in that. through the Big E program, again, another innovative program. We don't necessarily speak about those things as government funding, but it is government funded. And again, all the universities that speak are government funded. The fact is, one of our biggest takes on the budget, when I, as agriculture, go to ask for more money, education always gets a bigger chunk of the pie. And we understand why, because as much as I'm putting money and the government is putting money into building out these labs, if we don't have the human capacity and the personnel to drive these labs, then it makes no sense. So, George, as I wind up, a couple of things. Universities cannot divorce themselves from their responsibility. And their responsibility cannot just be to say the government must fund us. I think it was Professor Landis who spoke about that tripartite arrangement. In agriculture, we have a wonderful project driven by UWI Sadico, who again went out and looked at the research to build back our mangroves, and then what could we do in relation to food security, and came to us as government and said, listen, government has some land, how can we partner, and went to seek external funding. And we've brought all of that together with the private sector, Jamaica Flour Mills, to look at developing breadfruit flour to ensure that we can treat with food security while dealing with some of the climate change realities. I use this as an example that universities cannot sit on their laurels and then say, the government must fund us, the government must fund us. There will always be competing calls on government funding. And I do believe more funding should be put in research. But if more funding is put in research, does that mean we put less funding in just running the universities? Again, one more thing, and it's something that we have to think about. I'm not sure, and having spent time in student government, I'm not sure our universities take a sort of private sector minded approach to do research that can lead to resources for the institutions. And all over the world, in all developed countries, universities use their research and development to drive resources for their institutions. And we cannot divorce ourselves from that reality, because that is why I think sometimes our research is not, I'm trying to find the right word. We need to be more practical in ensuring that we're treating with the solutions that so Yamros, I need the universities here to tell me, what can I do to ensure that I cauterize the spread of Yamros in the quickest possible time? Did they have a student who already did that work? Do I have access to that? Can I, as minister, go on a database and type in Yamros University?
You're going to get your right of response, Dr. Brown. I'm protecting Minister Green. Continue, Minister Green.
Yeah, the question is, do we have that? And if we have that, and I think Professor Linda said it, universities cannot shirk, and he didn't, their responsibilities of engaging around that. So, to summarize, this government is willing to put the money where their mouth is, and we've shown it in increasing budgets. We've been putting more money towards science and technology. We're already on a robust plan to build out STEM institutions so that we can truly not just speak about it, but in the mind, in the culture of our citizens, concretize science. And
Dr. Brown, I have to give you the first rebuttal.
Very quick. Minister, I lived in the United Kingdom for 23 years. I was an academic there, and I went into industry, in the aerospace industry, where I also was doing research and development. So I think I know what fuels research in the United Kingdom. I can't speak for any other country. And I can tell you it's fueled at the very foundations by the government of Britain, who puts money out there for academic institutions to compete for. So you see, let's use your example. You said you want help to solve a problem with yam
rust disease.
Right. In the United Kingdom, that we put out, there's a grand challenge, and the government would say, here's £1 billion, my universities, please apply and tell me how you're going to solve this problem, and here's the money for you to go and solve the problem. So that's the challenge, Minister. I cannot go to a private sector company in Jamaica and say, hey, can you give me some money to help solve this yam rust problem for the government of Jamaica? right? And that's what I'm saying. Because yes, Minister,
I'm not
I
disagreeing.
can tell you that I have been talking to the private sector and have been trying to get them to fund activities on this campus and to fund us to solve their problems. But I'm saying to you, Minister, please, that the government must understand that the countries like Britain put public money, taxpayers' money, into the institutions to fund research. And if the government of Jamaica is saying that that's not going to be your approach, then we're not going to go anywhere
No,
far
but Dr.
soon.
Brown, sorry to do this, George, but we're not disagreeing. In fact, I said it, Professor Linda said it. There
Minister,
is a policy.
you clearly said that if our expectation is for governments to fund us,
No.
then you disagree.
No.
That's what I heard.
No, I couldn't say that when Dr. Brown, the government funds the institutions already.
But Minister, that
we-
funding you
Hold-
give
hold
us
on, hold on.
is to keep
Hold
the
on,
lights
hold
on,
on, hold
to
on.
pay the water bill,
Chairman's
and to
privilege.
pay my
Chairman's
staff.
privilege is-
It doesn't cover
I'm-
research.
I'm invoking
Hello,
chairman's
hello.
privilege. Hold on, Minister Green. Hold
Allow
on,
me
hold
to
on,
finish.
Minister Green. Hold on, Minister Green.
let me
Hold on,
finish.
hold on. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Dr. Brown, you're going to allow him to respond. And then,
Yeah.
as the host, I may grant you a second bite at the cherry, but you're going to allow him to respond. Proceed, Minister Green.
So I want to be very clear, and I hope Dr. Brown did not take that away from what I said. At no time, in fact, I started by saying the Science and Technology and Innovation Policy calls for dedicated funding from the government to drive innovation. I said that, and I believe that that has to be a part of the rubric if we're going to get the sort of research work that we want. In other words, just as you have said, Dr. Brown, our own policy speaks to having those funds that academics can tap into. I am not saying it's not either or. So I don't want you to take the rest that I have said. And again, and I was very clear in my start, I don't want you to take some of my things as policy on the specific areas, only on agriculture, right?
Hear you on that.
So, so that's very clear.
Yes.
Government has to put something to drive research, but I also believe, Dr. Brown, and I'll say it again, the universities also have to see how they can develop models that I think Professor Landers spoke about this. How can we develop tripartite models that can ensure that we have the sort of capacity,
Yes.
financial capacity?
Yes, here on that, Minister. Professor Linda, let me come to you for this. Both gentlemen have hit points that many people would agree with. There are many people who would agree with all that Dr. Brown has said, and there are people who would be sympathetic to the straddled position that the minister just put on the table. I'll ask you this. In the reality of a country, let's use Jamaica as example, where the lion's share of any estimates of expenditure has education as number one. It has national security as number two. We kill 1,400 people here every year. It's a problem that no other CARICOM country has. Then you're talking about health and the other things. Is it realistic to expect the kind of, the kind of altered funding from the government for research and development, like the example that Dr. Brown uses from the UK? I hope the point is clear.
Point is clear, sir. So I think I agree with Dr. Brown in his approach that the government should earmark funding for research and innovation. But there are other avenues that the government can do, other avenues the government have that they can share with us universities, for example. I know that, and I work very closely with the Ministry of Health because of my particular research. And Minister, I'm trying to work very closely with your ministry too, so I'm serious, I'm going to call you. But the government has access to international funding that universities don't have. And in those partnerships, we can get access to that funding. They have a lot of grant funding. Sometimes they don't even use that funding. And I'm speaking from, so it is very crucial to go back to building those bridges between the universities and the governments. And whether you're sitting where Clive is sitting in Barbados or in Guyana or here or in Trinidad and Tobago, how do we build those bridges so that we can get access to that funding. The minister might not have it in his estimates of expenditure for during the year, but he may have access to FAO funding or ECAC funding or so on, that working together we can solve the yam rust problem. And I'm glad he's agreeing with me. So those are the novel ways I want us to look at funding. And funding is something I wake up every day thinking about and thinking about it going to my bed at night. So
Yeah.
I don't want to turn this conference to funding conference.
It's funny you say that, because I'm fighting the urge to give all of the panelists another go at this funding issue because it is so important. But I've been given a task, and I'll not upset my masters on this one. Professor Landis, let me come back to you and deal with the level of education. Because in terms of preparing the workforce for the technological demands of the future, what must Caribbean leaders do in terms of specific steps, if you have any, at all levels, to enhance STEM education for these improved outcomes in the future where the workforce is concerned, sir?
Okay, before I answer that, I can't resist just adding a last point relating to
I
funding.
suspected so. Go ahed, make it quick, please.
And it's just this, would it be different for the private sector if they knew that our universities were not just picking their pockets, but that we're looking to share in a potentially profitable enterprise, and that they have a share in any profits? Would it make a difference to the minister if we had something like the Bayh-Dole Act? I want to go back to that. It was so transformational because it just made that arrangement, which is roughly 1/3 to the government, which is funding the public institution, 1/3 to the institution, and 1/3 to the investors. And so you don't think of it as, we're just giving something for nothing. We're investing in an innovation product. Not all of them will succeed, but if one hits big, you will share in it. So that's what I wanted to add in terms of, just creating a more nurturing framework to get that tripartite relationship going. In terms of how we can involve STEM education, evolving more pervasive, I think we need to take an approach which has worked well. Again, it's one which involves those three partners. If you look at what the University of Calgary has done, they have looked at a program, to do with a school to do with. I'm getting an echo. I don't know if you're hearing it, but I will continue speaking.
Just a second, Professor. Just a second. Don't lose your train of thought. We're good, Perrin? Okay. Carry on, sir.
Okay. To do with data science. And so the idea is that we can upskill persons who are in the private sector. We can upskill, when I say we, the higher education institutions, we can upskill people from the private sector. And the way that it's envisaged is that you have a very low entry to get people in and to get them into short certificate courses, which don't end up with a full degree, but they have a very low entry point. They're basically a basic entry level point, so that you can bring people up to speed about what this data science and analytics is all about, or AI, or whatever it is. And then you will see from those, there are some people who really have aptitude and an interest in the field, and then you offer the next level, and you give a slightly accelerated movement from that first level to the next level, which might be a diploma, because they've already covered basic material. And then, from the level of the diploma, for those who really show great aptitude and leadership, you can bring them into a master's or even a PhD. And again, you give them advanced standing because they've already covered the intermediate level. And so, you can start off with a very open and not at all an elitist approach to get lots of people in from the private sector, from the public sector, to bring them up to speed with the topics of interest in STEM. And then you can ladder it so that you can then identify the leaders in that field and fully upskill them the whole way so that they can really lead the entire economy.
Thank you for that. Professor Mohammed, I haven't heard from you in a while, so I'm putting the same question to you this way. The workforce in the future, outfitting that workforce of the future with the skills needed in STEM. Now, what should governments do now? What would you advise them to do?
Well, I think I'd like to move away from the government centric model a little bit, conversation, but they do have a very important role to play. I think the most important role is really to look back at the pipeline, what feeds all the way up to university. And one of the things that we have been advocating for and we've done here at UG in Guyana to an extent is that we have recreated our teacher training, our faculty of education, and created a technology and innovation unit, not only for training teachers how to use technology and innovation, but training them about the use of technology and innovation, how they can incorporate those, but also how they can get their students involved. We have, for instance, one of the first AI policies at universities. It's, of course, an evolving policy, but it's really based on the idea that we cannot be technology averse. So that we allow our students to experiment and we try to regulate that and look and study that and to see how that plays. The other thing we've also been looking at, I'm listening to all of this and thinking that people just think that people just know how to innovate by magic. By the time they get to university,
Yes.
they know how to innovate. And I don't think that that's the case. Innovation is something like a skill, it's a muscle. You have to develop it. And I think that one of the things we need to do in terms of looking at education policy going back, talking about feeding that pipeline all the way up to university, and even citizen scientists, that many of them are out there experimenting, innovating, making things. You'd be surprised at some of the things that ordinary citizens come up with and they think about and they try, right? So an avenue for that. But going back to this thing, this technology stream in schools, we have projects in the university that we're piloting right now that work with small children. I've spoken about that over time to look at how innovators are created from early, from 9 years old, all the way up to when they get to university. It's the first cohort, so we're in our final year now. We'll be able to share that research later. So there's that. There's a science, the national science policies, but I want to go back to an original point I made that might have been missed. You know, transformative research is very, very expensive. Very expensive. I've been listening to the scale of billions of dollars, etc., that people are talking about, and that is true. We need those kinds of that scale of funding. But to believe that our governments, in the particular conditions that we have in the in the region right now, will be able to find that kind of money by itself, I think that might not be forthcoming very soon. But if they collaborate and pool funds, certainly for big projects, transformative projects, I think we can do that. And one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about recently is how per capita, in terms of natural resources, how rich the Caribbean region is combined, compared to the population sizes of this territory in comparison to the rest of the world. Some of the places we're talking about, some countries in this region have more natural resources than them, and far less people. So I think the question is, how do we work and collaborate? How do we leverage what we have? And the other issue is, how do we protect? And this is a big thing that we were talking about yesterday. How do we protect what we have from people coming in and surreptitiously, like the biopharma work and a lot of the natural products that have been developed from all over the place that we have
Yes.
all these all in the Caribbean. How do we protect those things, and how, when as academics we have to work with overseas academics, how do
Yes.
we keep that knowledge, and that material, and how do
Yes.
we take a share in it, ensure that we take a share in it? So it's quite multifaceted,
Yes.
I believe. But in terms of of governments,
Yes.
I think setting the framework, looking to collaborate, creating policy, and opening up some of those pipelines to funding that they alone might have, but also making sure that the private sector is involved. And the last thing I want to do, this question about making science sexy, that science is not sexy. I'm really, really a science a kind of buff, and one of my favorite programs is a program called Click. It comes on the BBC
BBC.
every Friday at a certain time. We can do something like that for the Caribbean. If you look at the Answer McCall, the SABGA Awards page, you will see how many Caribbean scientists have done fundamental, phenomenal, transformational work.
Yes.
At least 20 of them, right? But we don't know. That's kind of siloed in somewhere. We need to
Yes.
do this work, and that's the work of you journalists.
Yes.
That's
Yes, I'll take that on, Professor.
Right.
Yes, I'll
Okay.
take that on.
Say more, but I know you're pressed for time.
Yeah. I want to ask, thank you for that. I want to ask you, Dr. Brown, and believe me, thankfully I work in the public, so if I'm telling tales, my people will draw me up on it. So believe me when I say this to you, that given the real discussions that have been had in this country about a labor shortage, at least the government says there is a labor shortage, skills shortage. The leaders in the private sector, the captains of industry also bemoan the labor shortage. Earlier this year, William Mafula at Wisynco said they had to pause expansion because they were short about 500 workers and he didn't know where he was going to get them from. That's a fact. So here's this now. Continuing on the line of workforce development. It has been said, has been grumbled, that laterally, the university graduate trained by institutions such as like yours, the skills that they possess do not marry with the industry in which they work, they seek employment and are employed. And so the simple question is, if you accept that this is an issue, how do you ensure that the graduates you prepare and send out, their skills align with what the employer is looking for?
Mission. So I can't speak to other institutions, but we remain committed to producing work-ready graduates, graduates that are ready and appropriate for today's.
And how do you manage to do that if you're going to give free advice to your competitors?
Okay. Well, first of all, you've got to make it a mission to ensure that you complement theory with practical. So even in our business school, where you may think, okay, well, how do you do that in a business environment? When I was a student here some 20 odd years ago, if you're a business student, or at the time it was called commerce, you had to go and set up your little shop. You would see students out there almost higgling, learning business. So we would give them the theory in the classroom, but they had to go and set up a little shop, and that was their project. And you see them all around the campus trying to sell you something. Today, of course, we've evolved, and we now have what we call on campus seminars. So the business school students they're taught everything, George.
Yeah.
In the seminars, Minister Green, we teach our students how to groom themselves to become future business leaders. We then say to them, go out there and put on several events on your own with guidance from your lecturer, and they go out there and they get the funding and they put on their own events. So we give them the theory, George, but we ensure that when they go into the business world, they hit the ground running. And I'm not just telling you this, George. We do our market perception surveys every year, and the employers tell me and all of us here the same thing I'm telling you, that our graduates hit the ground running, they're ready for work, and they're easily trained. They have a can-do spirit. That's the mission here at UTech, right? So we are doing that. Of course, you have to keep recalibrating yourself. So we keep inviting industry to come on campus, tell us what they want. Every course, every program has a strong industrial advisory board, and we're very proud of that. So we ensure that we're producing the workforce that Jamaica needs and the workforce that the Caribbean wants. So that's the mission here, and I'm trusting that's the mission for all universities, but certainly for UTech. We produce graduates like you who become leaders in their industry. And we will continue to do that for time immemorial.
Thank you for the gracious words. Professor Linda, let me ask you this, though. Still with workforce development and the STEM education agenda as you interpret it being set now, how would you advise the design of that STEM agenda to create better, more responsive, more intelligent to the needs of the time workers in the future? What would you say?
I would like to kick this one to Prof. Landis,
You-
who outranks me at the University of the West Indies by far.
All right, Professor Landis, he's putting this question to you, sir.
Okay, please repeat the question.
Right. Oh, no, but he basically answered before. I was asking about, from his perspective, the reset of the STEM agenda where education is concerned. But you gave us a nice answer earlier. I'll take that. I'll take that answer. No problem. So, Professor Linda, then it leads me to ask you this question. Where science is concerned and the the fact of it not being front and center of the national conversation, and it being a difficult thing for a finance minister to say, okay, let me put more of this into R&D and scientific pursuits, when it is the justice minister will come to him and say, look, the US State Department says we have 5 prisons that are like dungeons and I need to fix them now. So in terms of the balancing the economic realities, what argument can be made or what approach can be taken to elicit more from the same governments that we're talking about now to channel into R&D and scientific development?
Is very
Dr. Brown whispered priority, but go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Professor
buddy.
Linda.
So it's very important that we don't look at this as a either or approach. I'm so sorry. It's very important that we don't look at this as a either or approach. We have the science policy well written, which can be implemented. What we are lacking is bringing it alive and to convince our governments and our stakeholders, the taxpayer from the little village that I come from, to say this science is making your life better. And how do we make this into an enterprise which is saleable? And I'll give you an example. We were deeply involved in a scientifically driven solution with a particular ministry. And then we had a political expedient position that came up, and all the science was abandoned, and the PR took over. So it's not really, should not be an either or, but it should be that it is science and tech, innovation, high priority. How do we show the nexus between the investment and the return on investment? And that is where the problem is. Otherwise, we'll be just be a total PR, giving lip service to science and technology. And it is up to the Eurotrades and the media to do a lot more. And it is not to go on TV to promulgate policy. And nobody wants to hear about policy. They want to see, how is this affecting my life as an ordinary Caribbean taxpayer?
Yes.
How is it making me free from disease or healthier or richer and drive a nicer car? That's what you need to promulgate.
Yeah. We're almost at the end, panel. We are in the dying embers of the discussion. As Andrew Mason would say, the cows are preparing to go home. Minister, in terms of the portfolios under your thumb, what are you doing, the ministry, to encourage startups, encourage businesses, encouraging young people to come to you with an idea and to expect the ministry to hold their hand as they embark on business in a related area? SMEs, the kind of tech innovation. Give me an answer to that.
So a couple of things, George, and make my last intervention, and then apologies that I will be able to.
We're almost finished, so your last intervention will see us go. So that's fine. That's fine.
So one, I wanted to say a couple of things, but let me start with what you asked. Part of what we're doing is definitely through one of our entities, the Jamaica 4-H Club, is trying to see how we can help our startup, especially agri-enterprises, to not only embark on that enterprise, but to embed innovation in what they do. So we do have some programs that we offer, where we offer training, we offer grant funding for them to actually start their enterprise, certification, and then hand-holding. So after they've started, after we've given them the money for them to do whatever, let us say, to set up a goat rearing business, right? Clearly, the hand-holding now comes in to ensure that they're using the technology, they're using the innovative practices, they're applying the research that we are doing through our research and development entity, and that they are getting the best outcomes from their business. So we've kind of embedded that and we've expanded our allocation towards that under the Jamaica 4-H Club. And for anybody listening now, you can just type in the Jamaica 4-H. It's called the REAP program, Rural Youth Entrepreneurial Program, and they have various avenues that you can get involved in that. Some of the other things, for us in agriculture, and it's been the same in mining, same in fisheries, research is non-negotiable. We can't move our agricultural sector further than our research agenda. So we have to have a robust research agenda, especially in the realities that we now face in relation to the climate. We have greater onset of diseases, new things that have never been here before. We have to find a way to treat it. So we have to continue to make that case, and that's part of to your question before, George. We have to make the case that it's non-negotiable. It has to happen. Or as a small island developing state, we literally won't be able to survive. We won't be able to get that food security that we're searching for. So if we didn't do the research led by Dr. Wade Myrie at the Coconut Industry Board to see how we could slow the spread of lethal yellowing, that we've been able to slow that by 70%, then we will not ever have a coconut industry. So for us, research is non-negotiable, and we make those pronouncements to the Ministry of Finance, and that's why we've been reaping some dividends in terms of getting the results. Last thing, Dr. Brown said it, Prof. Lindo said it. One of the big strengths of our UX program is the practicality of it. The fact that I've been to a number of the seminars and people actually do the work before leaving the institution. We have to show persons how the research makes their life better. So again, when we go in Trelawney and our research and development unit sets up a trial plot around Yamros, look at different chemicals and then says to the farmer, this is working, apply this. This will ensure that you can make money for your families. Those are the things that work. So part of what I'm looking to do out of this discussion with Dr. Brown, with Prof. Lindo, with the University of the Ghana, and anybody else who's willing, is to see how we set up that engagement framework that Professor Landis spoke about, tripartite engagement around agriculture and fisheries and mining, that we can use the resources that we have to generate more resources and to set up for-profit models that will drive innovation across agriculture. I think if we are able to do that, I'm willing for that discussion. Let's see how we can get that done. Thank you, George. Thank you, panel.
Thank you very much, Minister. Know that he's in his constituency, he's on the ground. A lot of work is happening in St. Elizabeth. We would appreciate that the parish was hardest hit by Hurricane Beryl. Professor Mohammed, my final point to you is this. For where we are now and for where policy is, for how innovation is regarded in the private and the public sector spaces, do you expect that in 15 years, we will be lamenting the same lament we are today?
No, absolutely not. I think that the exigencies of our time is going to force us to, one, collaborate, synergize, think about how we are to address the future. And remember, this is a population of very young people, not only in the Caribbean, but in the world. And they are pushing an agenda with or without the academy. We would have to get along with them. We'd have to come along with them. And some of the things that we've done, like for instance, I've put all my institutes in one building at UG. So they of course fight one another, but then they find a way to work together. We also have created a corporation called RED, Research and Enterprise Development Corporation, that is attached to the university but is separate. And because one of the things we found was that the academics are busy doing academic work, and when industry comes to us, they have to wait until they're finished doing whatever. And that kind of does not work. So we wanted to make sure that there was an industry efficient entity that could respond to the research questions that industry had. So there are many things that are happening, and that's working fairly well. So we're not going to be here 15 years from now. Believe you me, if we are having the same conversation, we will not be here because we have to move much, much faster than that. And I think I'm confident that we are not only thinking about it, but putting things in place all across the region. But my watchword will be collaboration, science-centered conversations, and ensure we enable the young people to get on board, to come in and to be inclusive, right? That's what we need to do. And I think we'll get there.
All right. Professor Landis, the final thing to you is this. That tripartite arrangement you spoke to in your very first response here this afternoon, there are gaps between and among those three pillars. How do we eliminate those for better outcomes in the future?
I think we need to actually win the argument with respect to the public altogether. I don't think we're going to be creating the kind of innovation spaces unless we can actually let people know what it is that we do with our research. I'm getting that echo again, but I'll continue. So, for example, if you look at John Lindo had said, people will notice if innovation affects things like their health and public health. Nobody really speaks about HIV anymore.
Yes.
And reason for that is that the universities and the ministries actually work together tremendously well with really cutting edge research. And it wasn't by accident, for example, that 7 out of the top 10 countries to be certified by the WHO to have eliminated mother-to-child transmission, HIV to the baby, were Caribbean. This was not an accident.
Yes.
And, but yet, our ability to communicate how this was achieved, how the universities, in this case, worked beautifully with ministries, with the precursors of CARPHA, and also, it was funded by a lot of money coming from abroad. But that's fine. At least it built all that capacity that was needed. And lo and behold, that capacity was built for HIV, and we used it immediately for COVID-19. And I've written multiple articles on the fact that the Caribbean did better in terms of deaths per 100,000, which is a sort of unit where you can measure small countries against big countries, against regions. We did much better than our neighbors to the north, our neighbors to the south. And people have to understand that the Caribbean can achieve great things, but we have to communicate our achievements in innovation and in science technology to the public so that you get a complete buy-in.
Hear you on that. Professor Lindo, Dr. Brown, finally, Dr. Brown was the one who made the point with the cell phone, but I'm going to put it to you in this way. It is, I don't know if it's ironic or contradictory, but it certainly is contradictory, that the same person who has a smartphone in their possession is unbanked. They don't have a bank account. Yeah? So that's the contradiction that is a reality in Jamaica. I say that to say there are many people who are not aware of science and technology and research and development being important to the extent that if they hear that health services or the budget for health has been cut, they'll rage, especially if they hear that more money has been put into science and technology and development and research. How does that rebalancing happen, you believe, from the perspective of a government trying to bring the people up to the importance of what's important where R&D in science and technology and innovation are concerned?
I think it has to be driven by, it has to be driven like a campaign. The same way we had a campaign about seatbelts or having too many babies and so on. It has to be hammered in day after day after day. And again, I think it has to, we have to promulgate the fact that we are in a different economy now. We're in a knowledge economy where there are so many opportunities. There's, as you said, high computing power being held in your hand. What can you do with that power? It's nice to watch TikTok on it. How do you engage technology? And the more we find out that people are engaging technology, is the more that they will move away from the traditional way of doing things. You mentioned banking. I mean, nobody goes into a bank again. People go into banks anymore?
Of course.
No, you're not supposed to go into a bank. You're not supposed to go into a bank again. But are we making that connection between where we are and the technology that we have, and the Clive mentioned advances in health, but how about advances in IT, for example, that is affecting our lives? How can we bring those to the fore? And that way, your technology minister can demand more, and he can use it to win an election too.
There you
as
go.
far as I'm concerned.
There you
Thanks.
go. Dr. Brown, the final word has to be yours. And the point I wanted to respond to is this. You have awesome responsibilities as the president of an institution with UTEC's profile. So therefore, funding evangelism is perhaps at the center of what you have to do. With the constant no's that you're getting when you go to central government and the struggles you're getting from the private sector, where else can you take this evangelism, sir? How can you innovate to get more funding?
Well, you're right. I'm on funding evangelism for sure. You saw some of that play out. Because we are an underfunded institution. The funding of tertiary institutions in Jamaica really needs to be restructured. There is no formula. We're not funded based on the number of students. We're not funded based on the number of staff. We're not funded based on our importance to national development. There's just no formula. So we're having that discussion with the government right now as to how to properly fund our institutions and how to fund our institutions with a bit of equity, because if you look at the tertiary education landscape, the lion's share of the government's funding for tertiary education goes to one institution. Right? So we have to rebalance. They deserve all they get, but we're asking the government to rebalance in terms of our university and other tertiary institutions. Here's the thing, George. If we don't innovate, we're going to be in trouble. Because who's going to save us from climate change? Are we going to be a group of islands that are going to wait for foreigners to tell us how to make our infrastructure more resilient to climate change? Are we going to have to look to foreigners to tell us how to adapt to climate change? Is it going to be a foreigner who's going to have to come in here and tell us how to solve yam rust because our government decides that they're not going to fund our institutions to solve that problem when we have all the brain power here? So for me, the funding is important, but here's the next thing. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Forecast. This conference is an example of what needs to happen, where UTEC, UWI, University of Guyana, UTT come together. And one of the largest funding pots in the world is in the European Union, where a group of European countries put together taxpayers' money, and they have this fund called Horizon. And they give this money to European countries to do research. But not only do they give it to universities, they give taxpayers' money back to private companies who also want to innovate. So let us not leave it to Jamaica to find the funding. Let us come together as CARICOM, create our version of Horizon, right, to solve our problems. And it is not to say that we're going to depend only on the government, but I am still making the point that the government has a role to play. The private sector will come in, yes, but the government has to drive the initiative forward, create the space, and be consistent in how we're funded. And one final thing I'll say, George, since I'm speaking to you as a past student, is that our university needs you. We need all our past students who want to give back, who should give back, to give back not just to UTEC, but UWI and all our universities, as you would do to any other good institution. I know in Jamaica, I'm sure you're contributing to your high school, and I'm saying see your university in the same light. We are also underfunded. We also need your support, whether in cash or kind. So I'm making this appeal to my alumni as well. But collaboration is the key, and I look forward to post-forecast when I can work with all the leaders on this panel to drive forward innovation in the Caribbean.
Forecast 2024. Thanks, Dr. Kevin Brown, Professor John Lindo, Professor R. Clive Landis, Minister Floyd Green and Professor Paloma Mohammed. Thank you very much. There'll be a 10-minute break. Just to remind you that what we covered today, we covered how to prioritize the policy and governance framework where science, technology, innovation imperatives are concerned. We looked at prioritizing education, we looked at workforce development, and we also looked at prioritizing research and development and the improvement of technological infrastructure. And the minister also spoke to what his ministry is doing to encourage startups in the portfolios under his thumb, the three of them: agriculture, fisheries, and mining. You've been a good audience. Thank you very much. That's my time.
Thank you.